I'm Jim Collison and live from our virtual studios around the world. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on June 16th, 2020. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. They have Gallup experts. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. Actually, if you're on our live page, so if you're gallup.com/CliftonStrengths/live, you can see that in the address bar there. There's a link to our YouTube instance there. If you click on that, it'll take you to YouTube. You can sign in and join us in the chat room. Ask your questions live. If you're listening after the fact, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, if you're listening on YouTube, there's a subscription button. Click the like button down there too. Subscription, you can subscribe and get notified whenever we do something new. And if you want to listen as a podcast, and all the cool kids are, although the pandemic has slowed that down a little bit, you can subscribe to us as a podcast. Just search Gallup Podcast on any podcast player. Micah Librant is our host today. She's a senior workplace consultant here at Gallup. And Micah, great to see you. Welcome back to Call to Coach.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be back. It's been a long time since I've gotten to join you on Call to Coach, but what a fun place we have.
Kind of a first post-summit Call to Coach that we've done. We did one last week, but we have a whole schedule coming up. Excited about the series today, so why don't you take a second, introduce our guests, and let's get started.
So I'm thrilled to get to introduce everybody to two of my favorite people and inspirational leaders that I get to work with here at Gallup. But really the reason that I'm excited to introduce them to you is the topic that we have at hand today. Many of our coaches and many of our consultants who use Gallup science and the science of strengths they get past that individual piece and then they think all that's left is teams. But the secret to great teams is that they're made up of brilliant partnerships, that two by two, we notice that people who have strong alliances at work are significantly more engaged and lead to more engaged customers. And what we have today is a really interesting and significant, timely story of powerful partnership. These two women that you get to meet today have a pretty cool story specifically to what the problems that they've overcome, the challenges they've been faced with, and the beauty of the partnership that's come out of it. So I'm not going to give away the whole story, but I will serve as your host to keep the conversation going. As we're going today, I encourage you to type questions that you'd like to hear from our guests or ideas that you have. Please keep that chat going. Utilize the chat to the extent that it serves your learning today. Jim's here in the background to keep an eye on that in case I miss anything, but I'll also keep my eye on the chat for you as well. So joining me today from our Chicago office is Kristi Rubenstein. She's the Senior Director of Enterprise Consulting. And from the East Coast out of DC, Ilana Levey. She is the Senior Director for Public Sector Consulting, both at Gallup. Kristi, I'll start with you with just a warm welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Micah. It's a privilege. I'm a big Call to Coach fan. So to be able to be featured today is really exciting.
I think in podcast world, we call that long-time listener, first-time caller.
Oh,
Thanks for being here. Ilana, welcome to you as well.
Thank you so much. I'm also a fan. I remember when I was in the recruitment process for joining Gallup, which was about 6 years ago, doing a little bit of Googling about what life at Gallup was like. And I think one of the first things I encountered was Call to Coach videos. So I just kind of went deep in the well of watching them, and they were super inspiring. And I felt like that whole kind of conceptual language of strength started to make sense to me. So yeah, I guess I've been like a lurker fan from afar, but it feels great to be a guest.
Well, welcome. We welcome lurkers with open arms. We're happy to have you as a guest.
Thank you.
Ilana, let me stay with you. Would you please give us your top 5 and a little bit about what you do here at Gallup?
Absolutely. So my top 5 are strategic, maximizer, individualization, ideation, and learner. And my role is to lead our public sector consulting group here at Gallup. And broadly speaking, our public sector group really focuses on our strategic, typically research-based partnerships with organizations that have some kind of public or social good component to their mission. Typically, that's foundations, government entities, both in the United States and abroad, multilateral organizations like the World Bank. So it's a broad category. Higher ed institutions would fall under this umbrella. It's a broad category of types of work and types of organizations, but the common thread is some kind of public serving component to our partnerships.
There's about a million questions I'd like to ask you about
Yeah,
all of that.
go
That's
for
incredibly
it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll dive into a little bit about that. Kristi, we'd like to hear from you. Tell us your top 5 and a bit about what you do at Gallup.
Sure. So my top 5 are strategic, learner, achiever, communication, and positivity. And I'm the senior director for enterprise consulting. And really, what we're paid to do is to generate new discoveries for our clients' most pressing problems and then provide recommendations on what they could do to create positive change. So basically, we want to tell them something that they didn't already know and then tell them what to do about it. And that can come in many different forms, whether it be, creating an exceptional customer experience, whether it's looking at the journey of your employee experience. Our clients want to transform their cultures. They want to understand their customers' needs, and of course, help people discover and use their strengths. So we really focus on corporations that want to create a positive change in these ways.
Wow, also incredibly interesting. It's so funny. I'm part of both of these teams that you both lead, but even to hear it from you, I realize there's so much more that we do to help people change the world every day. Ilana, you first called me, and I think we had a conversation maybe leading up to the summit about what was going on in your world and your partnership with Kristi. And out of that conversation, we realized there might be a story here, and certainly something we wanted to discover on Call to Coach. So, Ilana, could you tell us what is the story of partnership here?
Definitely. And it's so interesting because potentially there are multiple stories, but I think my story started that Kristi and I entered into this role, I would say in February. It's actually kind of a blur timing because so many things have happened. But
February 2020. When was that?
when was that? That feels like a very long time ago. But something I think noteworthy was that this combined group of enterprise and public sector consultants globally formerly was led by one very talented person. So one big change was that we moved from a leadership model of one person to, I think, a business-wide decision that our teams, our employees, and our clients would be better served with a dual leadership model. Because I think one of the things that Kristi and I really think about are kind of where are our similarities in the business and creating a common culture and a unified group, and then where are these sort of points of departure. So I think that the partnership story happened with this decision of a dual leadership model. And I think I became really intrigued by it because one of the clients that I've worked with at Gallup, probably my longest standing client that I've had a relationship, is a professional services organization that has a shared leadership model throughout the organization where they have technical leaders and client relationship leaders. And a big part of the story of our consulting work are some challenges in that dual leadership model. So it kind of occurred to me that a lot of people view dual and shared leadership with trepidation. And I remember when we first got put into these roles, not only do I really admire and respect Kristi as a person, and that's part of the story, but I embraced and really loved the idea of dual leadership from the beginning. But it occurred to me that a lot of other people probably out there have fears about it, have maybe a conception that dual leaders with some overlapping sets of responsibilities and accountabilities typically don't really work out. So I became really interested in trying to sort of share that story to help inspire coaches and teams and others to be open to dual leadership, particularly when it was strengths based and set up to succeed. So I thought that Kristi and I could maybe share some advice, and we're still early days in our journey, so I think this is going to evolve. I mean, I guess it's only month 4, but it's been a jam-packed 4 months, to say the least.
It's hard enough to, I think, separate one role into two.
Yeah.
It's even then harder to be one of those two who assumes part of it, but then to do it in the middle of the upheaval and uncertainty of 2020. You certainly we have a lot to learn, I think, from what's working here. Kristi, what makes your partnership work?
Yeah. I'll also just echo part of what Ilana said, where my respect for her really grew before we had this dual role together, because we sat on this management team of about 15 different managers. And then she went on maternity leave for a time. And I really noticed when she was gone. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Ilana, but right, like your first week back at work, I wrote you this long email about how much we missed you and where your absence was noted and how delighted I was to have you back. And part of that was because of the different perspective that you brought around the topics that we were discussing. It was somehow like related to the way that I would think about it, but with a different angle. And so as we were asked to take on these roles between the two groups, I knew that our partnership would be one of collaboration and respectfully engaging with each other's opinions, kind of coming from two different angles, but like still aligning to the same North Star. So, Micah, you asked what makes our partnership work. And I think part of that is that we foster these separate identities between enterprise and public sector without losing a feel of having a cohesive whole. So I know I got this part, you got that part, but we got this together. And that's really, I think, what's been making this work so far.
How much of that, Kristi, did you have to set up intentionally and really take care to do on purpose? And how much of it just sort of happened?
It's funny. I have communication number 4, and so I love to communicate things, and I have focus number 6. So communicate things in very simple form. So one of the first things I did was to draw a picture of what our organization looks like now. So I drew a bubble that had enterprise, and I drew a bubble that had public sector, and then I drew a big circle around us that said, our enterprise and public sector analytics and advisory group kind of all together as one. And I really wanted to communicate that, like, we have some areas where we do manage to different client needs. So there's special things about that, but that we're all in this together. So that was pretty intentional about wanting to communicate both the kind of togetherness, but also the separation of our groups to allow people to focus more and gain a sense for where they belonged within that structure.
I love hearing somebody with focus saying we let people focus more and that we should simplify things and see again, that strategic, let's see the whole picture. Let's describe what it is. Ilana, you had mentioned that, it works because it's strengths based and set up to succeed. What is the role that strengths plays in the way that you work together?
Yeah, I think it's pretty profound. I mean, for me, something that really unites us is that we both have strategic as our number one strength. We have a lot of strengths differences that we could talk about. Like my focus is certainly not in the top 10. I think it's low in the 20s, and we could talk about how that manifests. But the nice thing about both having strategic as number one is we very, very rarely disagree on the big picture and what it is that we're trying to achieve. I think where you see some differences would be in the tactics and the style, but that's okay because there's an agreement to what you're driving towards. Where I think, could be a challenge, and again, different strengths combinations can work with powerful partnerships, but I think if there's a partnership where there's kind of constant disagreement about what you're driving towards, then I think there can be some challenges. I think the strategic theme also is you can kind of quickly grasp where it is that you're going, and other themes, you have to take a little bit longer to get there. So what I like is that we're kind of going at the same path, the same pace and the same path, but the way that we're getting there is a little bit different. I also think in the beginning, there might be some tendency to try to replicate each other's style. So like if Kristi sends an email on X topic because of her really high communication, I think in the beginning, there was a little bit of a feeling like, oh, I should send an email around the same time conveying very similar information because that way it's just mirroring each other a little bit better. And now I think we're learning more, no problem having Kristi communicate for both of us or for me to communicate for both of us on those areas of, shared values or where the information is the same. And I think that we're definitely growing into more feeling just really comfortable about each taking the lead on what we're more naturally wired to do, but doing that part intentionally. And I think talking about it with others. So, I think, Kristi, with your focus and your communication, you love a really tightly defined meeting agenda. So I remember when we had our first co-meeting that we were facilitating, I think my style in the beginning, because I like to get a lot of input from people, I was like, hey guys, anybody have any agenda items you want to talk about? Not at the meeting, before the meeting. And then Kristi was like, yes, I have 10 perfectly crafted agenda items. And then it was sort of like, okay, this is great. Now I see that level of sort of like care and formality in that type of communication is something that's really, really important to Kristi, and I can see the benefits. So let's go with that because it makes a lot of sense.
Mhm. Yeah, our management team also has a lot of achiever.
Yeah.
And so I think that we can even, when Ilana and I have our team meetings, we can get into task mode wanting to talk through everything. But Ilana, with her individualization, will bring in a lot more, I want to say, personality into the meeting. Like get people talking. What do they think about this? Kind of just loosen up that agenda where those points become very meaningful and it's not so mechanical.
Sounds like right now you're in this beautiful place, certainly accelerated, of learning what each other brings and honoring it. Um, how intentional are you about talking about that together? What kind of real conversations do you have about your work styles or your preferences or even your strengths?
I think we do a lot. I mean, we have a weekly connect, which is great. It's a very valuable, to me, really special time during the week. We're in lots of meetings together. So I think if we didn't enjoy each other's company, people could say, oh, we don't need that check-in this week. I've already seen you 10 times. But I think we really value it. And I think what's interesting, Kristi, for someone like you that is very like structured and focused, I think we do use that time. We usually have like a few tactical things that we can just run through, like, hey, what's the agenda going to be for this? Or here's an email we have to get out, or here's a decision we have to make. But we definitely spend a lot of time thinking through what are we seeing in our relationships with other stakeholders? How can we support each other in some, because a big part of leadership is stakeholder navigation, figuring out, hey, this person has this expectation for our group and our roles, but this person has a diametrically different expectation. How do we navigate all of that? So I think we talk a lot about that, but I think we've had really open conversations too about where we're naturally wired. So, for instance, a big part of our role is on financial management. Kristi is like spreadsheet queen is that doesn't even begin to capture her amazing spreadsheet skills. So, I mean, that's, I think compared to like a mere mortal, I'm pretty good, but she's like amazing. So obviously it was a no-brainer that Kristi's going to naturally gravitate to sort of own some of that. But I've always felt really respected in the sense that I know the input I want to give. I know what I'm looking for. I know the big picture and the decisions that we have to make. But my view is like, why interfere with that beautiful spreadsheet? And I don't want to introduce any errors in there. So, I mean, I think that comes from a place of trust, right? Not only do I know that Kristi's very good at it, I trust that she will have my interests and the interests of the group that I manage at heart when we're focusing on that product. So I think that's a special thing.
And I count on Ilana in just the eloquence of her speech. And, at Gallup, we are not in the business of pretty good. We are in the business of excellence. And so just as, Ilana explained that she has a good working knowledge of some of the things that I love to do. And I'm a pretty good communicator. Like she takes it to a whole nother level. So even just realizing that what each other love to do and where we're finding excellence in each other's roles. We're really at our best when we have each other and utilizing those complementary partnerships. But you're right, Micah, it takes time to learn what those are. And I think, facing a global pandemic and a long overdue racial uprising has been topics that have really forced us to uh, step up and be challenged and let some of those talents really come to the surface because our organization and our clients need us right now um, in a strong way. So it's been a time where we really do bring out the best of what we have, just to help us all get through this.
What is that like? Let's go there. How are you navigating all of these very serious, very noteworthy challenges?
I'll say one of the things that has been interesting with the current events that are happening in our country right now, from how we're reacting to COVID-19 to the events of the past few weeks that have like crescendoed into this need for racial equality throughout our country. In an interesting way, it's really brought our two teams together. Because my clients in the enterprise group, they want to know what the general public is thinking because the general public are their customers and their associates, their employees. So they want to know the extent to which coronavirus has disrupted their lives, which our public sector is studying through our Gallup panel. Or they want to know, like, now that things are opening back up, are people ready to come back out? Do they have the financial means to be spending money? Is a question a lot of our clients are asking. Like, what can we expect in terms of people wanting to come back out and re-engage in our business? And, to what extent should we expect there to be a resurgence in customer demand? And all of the answers to those questions come from the data that we're gathering from our Gallup panel. That's not just historical data, but it's also future oriented to understand customers' perceptions around how safe they feel coming back out into the world right now. So I've seen over the last month our teams really working a lot more together and learning a lot more about what each other do and how we can support each other's different divisions in collaborating to give those answers to our clients right now.
Yeah, I would say that it's obviously there's been a number of intense challenges that we're just beginning to deal with. It affects our performance management. It affects our financial management. It affects the willingness of clients to enter into really long-term partnerships with us. So I think one thing that's been pretty clear is sort of the stress level on our society and workplaces have gone up. We see that in our data. So I think that, one of the things that I appreciate about Kristi is I think we both have a calm leadership style. So we've definitely, I think, internalized, inherited some stressful situations, but I think it's very important when we communicate externally that we're also balancing that long-term horizon and the unknown with optimism for the future, with consistency. I think we've both really drawn heavily on some of our demands of leaders, research, and trying to embrace that. So that's been, I think, a really interesting experience. I think something that I've also seen from Kristi and maybe been inspired there is if we talk about the racial awakening, for instance, that we're having right now, I think organizations have both an internal and an external response. On the public sector side at Gallup, our really natural inclination is to focus on the external side. I mean, I think we really walk the walk. We've been surveying the experiences and the life perspectives of Black Americans for over 8 decades. We're doubling down on that. We're going to be really launching a pretty large-scale research initiative to be the definitive source of objective information about the very varied and important lives of Black Americans, both sociologically and in the workplace. And I think one of the things I'm also learning, though, is how to balance that external focus of our group with some of that internal hard work that needs to happen about the diversity of our workforce, about some of the difficult conversations that organizations need to have about diversity in leadership ranks, about commitment to different types of recruiting, and to have, some difficult conversations potentially about what life is like in a workplace for Black Americans. So I think that we've been having these intense conversations, which is typically not something that you associate with newer leaders. I mean, usually leaders that have built up sort of a reservoir of trust with the people that they work with are better equipped, I think, to have those conversations. But I think that having this partnership and being able to bounce ideas about how far do we want to take these conversations right now? What can we commit to? What can't we commit to? And then balancing kind of our desire for the speed that we want our groups to move against the backdrop of Gallup as an organization, because we're not isolated groups. We have to move also at the pace of a company culture, even if we want to be sort of trailblazers there. That's been, I think, a really positive example of why having a partner is really valuable. I think that would be very, very hard to do by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking just in the pre-show about so many people are afraid of dual leadership roles. And I think a lot of it might have to do with, Ilana, what you're saying, when situations are delicate and situations are volatile and important, can you really distribute that across more than one person? Right. So, Kristi, can you say a little bit about why it's beneficial to do this at all?
Yeah, sure. I think, just to be honest, I feel like leadership can be lonely. So whether it's, I think you realize that the first time that you become a manager and you start leading people who were your peers last week, and then all of a sudden you don't go to lunch quite as often, or you don't know how they're really doing, or if they're telling you the whole story. And then you start to feel like, well, who can I confide in? Because, I don't know if this is a final decision, and I don't know if I should be talking about it yet. So it can start to feel pretty lonely when you don't have that confidant. So, similar to what many of our coaches on the call today talk about are things that I talk with Ilana about, whether that be, dynamics between people on the leadership team, whether that be challenges that we're facing or hurdles that we need to overcome, even just reflecting with someone on another situation with really no judgment. And there's no consequences for what I say, because we're in this together, that it can just really create a very just comforting piece to know that you have a best friend at work who is a co-leader with you, and wants the organization to succeed as much as you do, and is there really in arms with you and working through it together. So it's been great.
I saw in the chat, and Kristi, I'm thinking that maybe some people who listen are thinking, don't you guys ever disagree? Or, I mean, what
Can it really be this good?
Right. Like, what happens when you disagree, or is there conflict, and what happens? So I thought that, that might be a good thing to address. And so a few things. One is, I I don't use the word conflict. I think that, as I mentioned, there are going to be times where we have different tactics or different natural inclinations. I mean, and they can be very minor. Like even this morning, we were co-presenting at a town hall where we had a good swath of our group. And my style was doing some introductory remarks. And my style was like, oh, I don't need slides. This is just a preliminary thing. I'm just going to kind of wing it. And late last night, Kristi was like, well, the other people in your section, they're going to have a slide. It probably will look more, consistent or polished, reading between the lines that you have one too. So of course, for a split second, I'm like, oh, like I don't need a slide. I'll be fine without it. I have other things I have to do. But then, I took a step back and I was like, look, this is important to Kristi. She's probably right. So let me just spend the 20 minutes and make this slide. But I also knew if I genuinely didn't have time, I could write back and say, actually, this is more important to you than it is to me. So here are my bullet points. Can you make the slide? Because you're the one that really cares the most about it.
I was ready to do that, Ilana.
I know. I thought you were ready.
I already created a template for you. Just fill it out.
Just fill it out. I just want this to be a nice package. So, I mean, I think that that's a great example where you need to step back and think, okay, why is this important to Kristi? What is the side that I'm not seeing? I clearly saw the benefits, but I also think it's a question of knowing what is the motivation of it being really important to someone. Is there a value? And at a certain point, just sort of saying, who is it more important to? If it's more important to one of us, then that person can kind of take the lead on it. But this is like the small thing. That's a small example of if you don't have a good relationship with good communication where you're doubting each other's intentions, it could lead to quote unquote conflict. Obviously, it's a small example, but I think relationships in the workplace, they tend to break down not because of big things. They tend to break down because of mistrust arising from what I think are just sort of stylistic and strengths-oriented differences that people aren't taking the time to really think about, why is this important to someone?
So I've got a copy of one of my favorite Gallup books right here, Power of Two. And we talk about the 8 elements of collaboration. And when I teach this or when we work and consult with teams around this, one of them is trust, which I feel like is something that you addressed out loud, but then it's been kind of injected into everything you've said so far today. And what we talk about with trust is that one out of all the 8 is the ticket to entry. If it's not there, the rest of them don't matter. And so what I can hear is even the lens on conflict is different because you come from a place of trusting and knowing each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we're going to have instances, and I've seen it. We've been in some intense meetings, and not really just the two of us, but with others, because again, different stakeholders, different expectations. I think with that trust, it can be upsetting if I see someone who isn't spending the time to think about, like, why is Kristi coming from this place? What's behind it? Or doesn't see all the work that, kind of goes into something. I feel a responsibility to be able to be a voice from the background to say, hey guys, let's take a step back and think about, this is why Kristi's proposing something. I understand everything that went into it. I support it. But also, vice versa, we can say to each other, and we do this pretty frequently, maybe our message would have been more successful if we kind of positioned it a little bit differently. And that's where I feel like it's a good marriage of my individualization with Kristi's communication and the planning, because, you have to tailor those plans and those communications to the needs of different kinds of stakeholders. So I find myself getting kind of protective sometimes if I see that, someone's missing some of that nuance. But I think that happens in deep partnerships because you see each other at work so often, but you see things that no one else sees. So I think that that's kind of an interesting dynamic that evolves over time.
Mhm. I was recently reading a book about culture. It's by Ben Horowitz, and it's titled What You Do Is Who You Are. And in that book, he talks about that there's an inverse relationship between trust and communication. So the more communication that you need, then that is what enables you to build more trust. So if you have little trust, you have to communicate a lot. Like people are always asking why about those decisions that you make. But it takes a lot of time to be able to have those, a series of shared experiences where you've had your opportunity to over communicate why you're doing something or why it's important to you, to the point where when you really trust someone, you don't have to communicate quite as much about it because you understand where that person is coming from. So Ilana and I have been working together now for at least 2 years. So we've had a lot of opportunities to have all of those conversations and understand each other's perspectives, understand each other's strengths, have a lot of communication. But now we're working with a leadership team who neither of us have worked with very intimately for very long. We've known them for a long time. So we're finding ourselves needing to explain the why behind some of the decisions that we're making or some of the initiatives that we're proposing. And sometimes we could be caught a little off guard because, uh, I understood the why without having to explain it. And, a lot and I are connected, and then we get in front of the rest of the group and we're having to up the level of that communication as we're building trust.
Yeah.
I love that idea of just really being able to communicate a lot and knowing that that's something that will return dividends.
Later.
Lorraine in the chat asks about accountability. How either of you want to jump in here? How do you hold each other accountable?
Mhm. It's a great question. I mean, I think the good news is we're both hardworking. We're both, wired to be responsible. And I think that we certainly are not, having to sort of like chase each other and say, but Kristi, you promised that you would send that email, or those sorts of things I think have been really natural. I think where we're going to have to work on accountabilities are going to be on more bigger picture issues, because I think that we've had so many disruptions, and some of these are positive disruptions, like this awakening about talking about race. I don't mean disruption in a negative way. I mean that in a positive way. But I think we've had a lot of, plans for what we wanted to accomplish, and then a lot of external things happen, from COVID to really focusing on diversity to looking at the long-term financial implications of COVID and what that will mean for decisions that we have to make. So I think where we're going to really need to hold each other accountable is to also not forget about those longer term issues that we really wanted to tackle and address together. It's very easy to go into putting out fires and crisis reaction and letting other people set the agenda. So I think that that's a place where we'll need to continue to work to hold ourselves accountable.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you, Alana, on the big picture element. A lot of people on our leadership team, and even with Alana's ideation, we have a lot of large conceptual ideas and a very passionate group with a lot of influencing themes. So the hardest part for me is feeling a lot of excitement and maybe even pressure around those ideas, and yet a strong responsibility to follow through on those ideas. Uh, but I think, what I'm really counting on my focus and achiever towards the end of each meeting
Yeah.
to simplify, what are we doing now? And let's not take on the whole ocean, but at least navigate through, here are the first few waves that might get us towards that horizon. Let's, focus on those, get over those. And if it's working, like keep making progress in that way. So that's where I think we're holding ourselves accountable to getting that big picture by breaking it down into smaller things that we can achieve in a shorter period of time, and getting alignment around those, and then feeling some sense of accomplishment once you even just get over the first wave, and then the second one to eventually land on shore.
I wanted to add to that accountability question, and I think maybe what the question in the chat room was getting to is, how is the organization holding you accountable for people, right? As managers, as managing a group, oftentimes the buck stops at the manager of the team, and yet you're co-managing or at least in this group. And then how did it's a second part to that question. How did the group feel about that change that was made? How they responded to it? So again, how are you being held accountable as a manager, and then how did the group feel?
Well, I think that the good news is I think that the organization holds us jointly accountable, which I think is a healthy and important thing. So, for instance, let's say from a performance management standpoint, if Kristi knew or sensed that I was applying standards that were very different from the standards that she and her management team were applying around expectations, around what good performance would look like, I feel very comfortable that, Kristi would come to me and kind of call me out on that and say, we can't have a dual system where one element of performance is acceptable in one part of our group and is not in the other. So I think that's a really healthy thing. I think, Kristi and I feel very comfortable communicating directly with managers on each other's team. So even, little things, if it's about time cards or it's about Kristi saying to all of our managers, hey, I really expect you to have conversations with your team about what's happening with this racial awakening that we're having and how they feel about diversity at Gallup. That's not easy to have. And I think that there's a sort of joint accountability that the performance of our management team overall is really something that we're both held to. And it's very interesting because the financial management is also joint. So we have a number of metrics that we need to hit around management of our payroll budget, looking at like the alignment of talent to payroll. And yeah, I think it's unusual, but I think in this case it really works to have both of us jointly responsible because the stakes are really high. I want to give my teams our very best decision making. I want to give our clients, I want to give Gallup, but I also want to give that to Kristi because if I make a terrible decision, that would affect her. And that's an added level, I think, of accountability, but I think in our case is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Ilana, I'm remembering we went through an exercise about a month ago where we outlined like what are the performance metrics we're using to measure success within our team. So, I came up with like 12 that were appropriate for the enterprise team. And then you took a look at it and said, these 6 out of the 12 are important for the public sector team, but then we also have this other 6 that are important. So there are just places where the way that we hold our teams accountable for are common. And then there are things that are more custom. So common where possible, custom where it counts.
Kristi,
Ooh, that was good. Hold on.
That
was really good. Between your ocean wave and common where possible, custom where it counts. That was good.
And then second question, how'd the team respond?
How did the team respond to
the
dual leadership role?
Yeah, the dual leadership role.
I think you'd have to ask them. I think they like it, but even the way that we organized our meetings, we meet with the entire management group from both enterprise and public sector every other week. And then on the off weeks, we meet with just separately enterprise and public sector team. So it was a way for us to honor the differences in the group and know that, we're not always interested in talking about everything they're talking about. They're not always interested in talking about everything we want to talk about. But there are some things that are common in our culture that we all want to make sure that we're aligned on. So even like a little cadence of meetings like that, I think have illustrated that we can be a lot more focused on the things that are important to each group while still maintaining cohesion as an entire client-facing consulting team.
Yep. I think that's great. And it's very true, Kristi. And I think that the rest of our team sees our strength-based approach and action, even if we're not always explicit about it. Like, for instance, in our management meetings, everyone is going to expect and does expect Kristi to give the detailed financial updates and show the spreadsheets. I think if that role suddenly reversed, it would just be surprising to people. I think they would say, like, what's going on? Why is it not Kristi with the spreadsheets? And they have the same, a very high level of trust in her financial management skills. At the same time, I think I'm kind of known for that high individualization. So I get a lot of calls from people on the enterprise team like, oh, I'm having this kind of weird dynamic in my relationship with this person. What do you think? Do you have some insight behind the scenes about why that might be? What advice do you have? And so again, because it's not territorial, because it's strength oriented, I think it works really well. I know the managers on my team on the public sector side, they know Kristi, they love Kristi, they love to spend time with her. So I think another pitfall of dual leadership without trust is when you have leaders who say, like, why is this person on my management team going to Kristi for advice? That's a terrible attitude, because I think they gain a lot having the perspective of different leaders. It helps them fine tune their instincts. It's another source of wisdom. It's another perspective. It's a great thing. So I hope that people will say that we really encourage that and we view it really, really positively.
So, on that note, what advice would you offer to, let's say you're consulting tomorrow with a leader who wants to separate one role into two and start from scratch where you were in February? What would you suggest?
I think fundamentally, I don't want to be naive and say it can always work, because the chemistry of the two people has to be right. I think you can all see a couple scenarios where it could be kind of disastrous. And we all know examples of like dual leadership. We've lived a few back in the day, even at Gallup, of dual leadership models where there were not close relationships. So I think primarily my first piece of advice would be figuring out those positive partnerships based on, trust, mutual respect and admiration for each other, complementary strengths, but a commitment to what dual leadership really means. And what that really means is giving up some level of control at all times, to be wanting to invite someone in to help you make decisions. I think you have to make sure that the two people that you would appoint to those positions have that foundation, and then provide a lot of support and coaching and best practices and tactics to help take it to the next level. But if you're putting two people who can't stand each other into a dual leadership role, it's probably not going to work, because we need to spend a lot of time together. We will do these jobs a lot better if we actually enjoy doing that. And I think that this is the power of our best friend at work item and philosophy. When you live it in real time, I think you start to see how powerful it really is. But if we were going out of the way to not speak frequently, there would be a lot of negative, I think, repercussions.
Mhm. One thing that might surprise you is I think Ilana and I have only seen each other in person 3 times.
Oh, yeah. Good
So,
point.
yeah, I'm in Chicago and she's in DC. And so our relationship has really formed remotely. And I think that it might be surprising to some people. So, yeah, but I do agree with Ilana that being able to kind of have your own things that you're responsible for, and then some things that you work together on, and just being able to organize the relationship in that way is really important. And we neither of us have competition in our top 10. I think it's number 11 for you, Ilana. It's number like 30 for me, and so there's no beating each other out,
Yeah.
but there's still a lot of drive and achiever to be able to accomplish something together. But there's no prize. There's not just one prize to be won here.
Yeah.
I think that if there was this looming feeling that maybe someday there would be a single leader again, that
Mm,
that might generate more competition between us. But now that we feel like I mean, I've spent 16 years at Gallup all working in our enterprise consulting, and Ilana comes from her entire career path being more focused within the public sector. So this was really like um, just a career dream for us to be able
Yeah.
to materialize our careers in this way. And so we don't foster a lot of competition between each other. And I think that helps with the
Mhm.
collaboration.
That's a really great point, Kristi. I never thought about it that way, but the fact that I think you're right, I think there's no desire for this to become a singular role, which it's very liberating. Yes, I think that that's beautifully said, and I think that there probably are organizations that set up dual leadership. With the intention to kind of test people out a little bit and then
mm.
figure out, who's going to rise to the top. But there's none of that here. And I think that that's extraordinarily helpful.
Thank you both. This has been, I think, hugely insightful and just very impressive and inspirational that you can be so self-reflective in such a short amount of time that you've been here. But your ability to, I want to thank you for a couple specific things. One is to be so transparent about your experience. It's refreshing to get to speak to leaders about real life and to know that you're open to admitting some things are difficult and sometimes it can be lonely. And your ability to look in the mirror and really name what's working and what's not just speaks volumes to your consulting ability and your creativity and probably the human beings that you lead who do that for your clients as well. I also want to specifically thank you for addressing current events and being positive, forward-leaning leaders who are willing to have those difficult conversations. So thanks so much for being here. I think we've got a community of coaches who are going to benefit from realizing that this is an incredibly important stepping stone that we consult about, that we help people improve. And Jim and I have had the privilege of getting to be partners for years and talk about our partnership. But I think for people to realize that these exist 2 by 2 all over our organization, and that's in part why Gallup is such a special place. Hopefully that inspires them to go cultivate those same strong partnerships in their own little corners of the world. So thank you.
Ladies,
Thank
thanks for
you.
joining us today. I often have to say to Micah, okay, I'll start a spreadsheet. So, that's the kind of relation. That's the kind of relationship
I love it.
Okay, I'll make a slide. Geez, can't I just talk it through?
I know.
So maybe there's something going on there. Ladies, thanks for joining us today. It has been great and a great reminder for our certified and our coaches out there listening, like as they coach these partnerships to see these healthy signs or maybe some warning signs in that if it's not working. Competition is one good one to watch out for. Is it becoming competitive? How is the virtual communication happening? Who's taking on what roles and how are they doing that in a strength-based way? How are they looking individually at, hey, here's what I'm best at? And then leaning on each other for those things in those situations where say, no, I'm not necessarily great at that. If you could just get that slide ready for me, that would be awesome, right? And I appreciate that because I'm in those roles sometimes too, where that's just not necessarily my gift. And I really appreciate those partners who say, I'll take care of it. I got it. I'm really good at this, because that gives me the opportunity to turn around sometimes and say, no, I got this. Like, I'm really good at this and I'll take this for you. So great to hear that in action. We'll maybe put it on our calendars to check in with you guys a year from now. And
fun.
right, how fun would that be to kind of come back and say, we hopefully a year from now will have made enormous amounts of progress, both as a company, as a nation, as a globe, and some of the things we're going through today. And so we appreciate you guys. Both of you hang tight for me 1 second. On the way out, we'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available now on Gallup Access. And so you can get to that. Just gallup.com/CliftonStrengths is a great place to land. Lots of resources for you that are available for you there, audio, video programs, all these available out there. If you want to follow us or listen to us as a podcast, just go to any podcast player and search Gallup Webcasts. If you want to click that subscribe button there on YouTube, if that's how you're listening to us, you'll get automatic notifications every time we go live. If you have any questions at all about any of this and you want to engage, maybe your organization wants to engage with us in some way, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and we'll get right back to you on that. And then if you want to keep track of all the live programs that we do, on a regular basis. We keep them up to date on our Eventbrite page. Go to gallup.eventbrite.com, and you can just follow us there, and we'll post those, and you'll get an email when we do anything new and live. Join us in our social groups on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/group/call2coach. Easiest way. Big group, lots of great information going on there. And maybe you're not a Facebooker, and that's okay. You can go to LinkedIn and follow us. Search CliftonStrengths Trained Coaches. Love to have you join us there as well. Thanks for coming out today. Appreciate those who came out live. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.